Hey everyone, welcome to the Recruitment Show. We are talking about all of the major topics that people are discussing right now. Everything recruiting, future of work, and everything in between. I've got guests from all over the world to come and share their perspective and their thoughts and feelings and all of that stuff on these key topics. It might not be politically correct. It might not be what you want to hear, but it's people's perspectives, and it's important to hear people's perspectives. I love storytelling, and I think one story can illuminate a million more and really increase our understanding of these topics. So sit back, whether you're watching live or after, grab a drink, take a seat, and enjoy. Jeremy, welcome. Thank you for joining me. My first time I played my new intro.
I'm impressed. And thank you for the warning that I might not be politically correct. That has struck fear and dread into the fibre of my being. But it should be fun, shouldn't it? It should be fun.
But coming from The Economist, I thought you'd be able to walk that line of real journalism and politically correctness quite well.
I hope that phrase goes. I hope it disappears, and I hope people just understand. And I'm led by this, by the younger people in my life, the younger generation, who have no tolerance for attitudes of the past and how things used to be. And I think the world of work, particularly the world generally, but the world of work in particular, is so much better now that it has changed, and that some of those changes have been made, and that things that weren't politically correct seem to be on the way out, and it's now just the norm. So in our language, attitudes, I think
it is interesting. I think, but then there's a lot of stuff recently that is actually prohibits people from really expressing their views online for fear of being cancelled. I think that's interesting. But before we dive in, can I give you a proper introduction, and for people that don't know you, just to give a little context. So Jeremy Kourdi is an international experienced executive coach, consultant and business writer and commentator. Jeremy, as I alluded to, was a senior vice president in the Economist Group, managing director with 𝐓𝐡𝐞𝐫𝐞 Corporate Education, and head of publishing and research with the Chartered Management Institute. He has worked with successful leaders in organizations worldwide, published 27 books. I'm about to publish my first, so I need to get your advice on that. And has his own coaching practice. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining me. Much appreciated.
What is your book about? Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Lewis, and thank you for that introduction. But I need to know what your book is about.
It's about recruiting. So I'm writing with a friend of mine, and she is... she's a talent management exec coach lady, amazing lady called Stacey Shearer. She was kind of head of talent at Apple for many years and stuff, and we got to know each other well. I run an exec search firm, and together, what you find is people think recruiting's easy. You know, like you go in, we do recruiting, you go to a client, and people think, well, we've just raised a few million if they're a startup, or few billion, and of course everyone's going to want to come work for us. And once you start recruiting, it's actually way more difficult than people think. So we're writing, almost finished, pretty much a kind of how-to, all the way from like defining the need, like why on earth do you want to recruit someone, to making sure that you've onboarded them well and you've kept them, because it's way more expensive to hire someone than keep existing staff. Everything in between.
I love the sound of it. It's a must read. I'm trying to read a book a month, so that would be I'd love to get my hands on that. Sounds brilliant.
Thank you. I will be sending you a copy.
Please.
We're also going to do an audio book as well. Interesting to hear if you've done any of yours as audio books. But
so they have come out as audio books. I, as you can probably tell, have a face for radio. I probably don't have a voice for radio either, though. So my publishers get actors to do it, and I think they do. Okay. Large, yeah, but it is good. I actually think you're right. I prefer it if the author does it, because that gives the passion and the commitment to it. I might suggest that.
I'm actually interestingly or not, I take a lot more in when I'm listening. I'm quite a slow reader, and so if I try and read a few books a month, it would take me a long time. So I'm much more into my audio books now, and it goes in better, and actually remember quite a bit of stuff, which is quite cool.
See, this is interesting, isn't it? You're making me think of learning styles now and different ways that we take in information. I think that's a generational thing. I think I'm older than you, and I think my generation is less used to audiobooks. Kids today, or just people that are younger than me, like you, are much used to it, are much more used to it, I think. And it's much more,
no, it's true. It's true. Let's circle back to our early conversation, and I want to dive into like future of work, what that's kind of looking like, and a little also just to talk through like the skills that you feel are important for people to develop and hone for what this future looks like. But on you mentioned we mentioned political correctness a little bit, and I have a slightly different view, because I think now it's like people are quite scared to share their view. I mean, it doesn't have to be politically correct, but like share their view online, because I think there's been an awful lot of cancel culture. And you speak to folks privately, and they share their views with you privately, like with me privately, but are quite reluctant to share them with their colleagues or publicly online. And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic playing out now. I don't know if you're seeing the same, but
I am. It's shining a light, isn't it, on one of the shifts in leadership, I would say, and one of the things that really, really matters today. And if you're a leader, I think if you're running an organization, you need to be yourself. And we've said that for a long time, but we need to make sure that you or one, I should say, perhaps, is a decent member of the human race, actually, somebody that is authentic for sure, but also kind. And I think one of the shifts we're seeing in work now, and I think it is hastened by the pandemic, is a need for kindness. And by that, I don't mean anything soft or woolly or fluffy or kind of hippie-ish. I just mean being a decent person, going the extra mile. If somebody needs to, needs a favor or needs a hand, if you can help them, you do. Why wouldn't you? And it isn't as it was at the start of my career. I started my career in the 1980s, and it was much more then about climbing the greasy pole, sharpening your elbows, trying to get ahead. And I think the tolerance for that kind of behavior in work or online is fast diminishing, and I think that's a good thing. And I think workers are being kinder. I got to say that has a market value, doesn't it? Businesses have to be accepted by the communities they serve, and if there's a lot of dysfunction happening within the organization, if there's a lot of people with sharp elbows being unpleasant or just dysfunctional to each other within an organization, that is your brand. Don't imagine that just happens in your organization and customers outside it can't smell it. Your brand is a thread, really, that connects everything that happens in the organization with the outside world. If there's bad behavior, people know it. So make sure that behavior is as it should be, but genuinely in here, in your heart. And I wonder if you see this, if you recruit for values, behaviors, those kind of things, because I think they are much, much more important. When Elon Musk says, we need a hardcore culture where people are committed to, that was a throwback. Heck, people were saying that all the time in the 80s and 90s. That reminded me of 𝐷𝐿𝐻𝐿. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yeah, of course. Do you know, it's interesting.
Out of step with our times, didn't you think?
Yeah. You've been looking through my content on LinkedIn, because I speak about kindness all the time. I mean, I think also don't mistake kindness for weakness, because it's far, far from it. A good leader was hard, it was like aggressive. They'd have like the salary as a stick to beat their employees by. And let me tell you, I speak with thousands and thousands of people, and if they're happy, they're way harder to move. We're a headhunting firm. I'm calling people that are employed, and listening to their story, sharing the story of this firm that we're trying to hire for, and they're happy. They're way, way harder to move. And so you're right, like leadership now, and what people expect from a leader, is a leader that can nurture, develop their team, be kind to them, care about them, look after their needs. And that's way more powerful than, someone that is telling someone what to do. It's more like, what can I do for you? How can we do it together? And I completely agree. It's the way that it's going. And it's just, that you've got to operate like that now.
I think that's absolutely right. And I tell you where you particularly see it. You'll see it as a recruiter, I guess. People in their 20s and 30s absolutely have no experience of the sharp elbows or the harsh words or the dysfunctional. I mean, if that happens, particularly today, they'll just walk. If they've got the talent, if they've got the drive, then they'll just think, you know what, I can do better than this. I am better than this. And good luck to them. They should, I think.
You spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your family, and it's important to find the right environment.
I always struggled with whether you needed to like your colleagues, but that I think you do. For sure, you need to respect them. You need to trust them, and then it's just a short hop to actually enjoying their company. And I think that helps as well. I mean, not everyone and not all the time, but
it's a tough thing to do. And I'll just ask you a kind of question on this. There's a lot of talk around bring your authentic self to work. Just very topical these last few years, part of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a big topic is bring your authentic self to work. Yeah. But I always think, do people really mean bring your authentic self to work? Or do they mean bring your authentic self to work as long as you believe what I believe? It's very difficult to work with someone. And I think maybe back to the US elections, because the US is quite polarized with their politics, and you kind of like your flag's got to be in the sand on one side or another. And if you're a Democrat and you don't like Trump, and someone supports Trump that sits next to you, humans find it very difficult to work in a high performing team. But I find that very, very interesting kind of concept.
It is interesting, isn't it? I wonder, I'm not certain when I say this, so I'm going to pose it as a suggestion more than a firmly held view, that we have gotten worse at tolerating each other. We see that most obviously in politics. I speak to people for whom immigration is the only political issue that matters. And the idea that we should be a fortress in this country is okay by them, because the only issue that matters is that. Now, that's not my view, but it's their view. And when you explore it, you discover it's the only thing that matters to them. And then you explore it a little bit more, and you find maybe, as I did recently with a couple of people I was chatting to, that they're fearful of the alternative. Well, then that requires understanding, and crucially, it requires respect. I'm not going to be able to convince them or overcome fear by talking about something else, or telling them they're not afraid. What I need to do is understand where they're coming from. As I say, it's not my view. It probably never will be. But I don't think there's enough of this seeking to understand and then being at peace and accepting. In a democracy, do you know what? People can think different things and believe different things. To me, that's absolutely the way it is, and we should be much more tolerant of that. And I think you mentioned cancel culture earlier, and of course that to me is a sign of intolerance, I think.
Yes, I think so.
I hope that erodes. I think it will. I think it will, and be replaced by understanding, much more understanding. People, can I say one thing that occurred to me, one way that the world is changing perhaps, is this power of paradox. So what we see is the world is really stubbornly interdependent. Our trade, we rely on each other, our cultures are often kind of integrated on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, we are tribal and insular. We like people that look like me. We like our tribe. We're passionate about our Watford Football Club, for example. We are interdependent, yet tribal and insular. Here's the problem with paradox. So paradox is interesting anyway, but part of the problem of it, it's so polarizing. You're either one thing or the other. And I think what leaders need to understand, or anybody at work, is they need to embrace paradox. They need to get that, you know what, these people can be tribal and insular, but also we can be interdependent. We're technologically savvy. We can do more with our technology than we've ever done before. And yet we are risk averse. We're technologically fearful. We have people like anti-vaxxers. We have all of that going on. So, you see these paradoxes in life, and I just think they're not going to go away anytime soon. We need to. They're not.
And I think for me, if I link it to leadership and skills, someone that's able to get on with anyone and appreciate that people have different views, but still become friends with them and not argue. Because a lot of people, like, they can't have a conversation without arguing. You know, with someone of a different view, ends up being an argument, a shouting match, etc. And you see that all the time. For me, it's just like an important skill as a human is to appreciate there's different perspectives, and your perspective is one perspective, and someone else might have a different perspective, and that might be governed by where you grew up, your education, religion, life, whatever it might be that governs your view of the world. And you made a great point, like understanding, seek to understand. You know, and for me, that's just the key thing is, you know, when if you're trying to network, build your community, get a job, make friends with people, get on in life, work, whatever it might be, it's seeking to understand, which means listening.
But questions, by the way, are a great way to exert influence, but fundamentally, they're just a great way to connect with somebody. And I think, and not a loaded question, not a passive aggressive question, a genuinely sincerely meant question to connect with someone.
And also, you can have a different view, but it doesn't have to be like extremely opposite. Like, I have a view on something, but it's fine. You know, I mean, you mentioned, you know, anti-vax, which was been a big issue, like contentious issue recently. We had Brexit in the UK, you know, things like that. And certainly for me, and I just want to share my own experience, like with Brexit, I thought we'd stay I thought we'd stay in Europe, and part of that, and I was very surprised we didn't. And I thought, well, why did I think that? To watch and listen to people with a completely different view. And so I really got into podcasts, and I started to listen to people that could have been anti-vax or Brexit or whatever, just stuff that, you know, was slightly different to my view, and to understand. And that's really helped me the last few years.
I think that's right. I discovered, by the way, that East Europeans have a culture and a tradition and a history of not really trusting what their governments say. So a lot of the anti-vaxxers, when the government tells them to get a vaccination, they're skeptical of government. I never realized that until I explored a lot of the attitudes of anti-vaxxers, and some of them certainly were East Europeans who have a tradition and understandable history of not trusting what the government says. When you dig a little deeper, it's much more illuminating. It's
different. And the other thing, just on the anti-vax thing, is also, I think it's worth just separating. There were people that are anti-vax. There were people that didn't want the COVID vaccine, but not other anti-other vaccines and stuff. But again, I mean, that whole conversation, I mean, it evolved a lot, right? Again, it was a very aggressive conversation towards people that didn't want a COVID vaccine. And again, I felt like, you know, people want to understand, and it just, you know, seek to understand. People wanted information or more information. And if it's not, it was just a very, you know, it just highlighted some of the polar views, I thought.
I think that's right. And I think it's a task, isn't it? A task of leadership now more than ever to understand that you might have a difference about your attitude to a COVID vaccine, but actually that's one thing you might disagree on. And there's a gazillion things that you do agree on. And the risk is, of course, you lose the things that you agree on, or crucially, you damage the relationship because you're focusing on something that frankly doesn't matter. Get a vaccine. Okay, vaccinations matter. I get that. But in the scheme of what we're trying to do in this organization, for example, and the fact that somebody has a right to have their own view, move on. Don't explore it. Understand it. You mentioned politics, and US politics in particular. I think the reason Republicans didn't do so well in the midterms, there were lots of reasons for that, but they were talking about themselves, they were talking about politics, and they were talking about the past. Now, nobody wants to hear those things in an election. They start with themselves. That's another point about the world of work, this hyper-personalization, centricity. My world revolves around me. For sure it does when you set your political priorities, but it does on a much smaller scale when you go to the office. I want my life, my career, my work day focused around me. Heck, we have the technology to make that possible. Why isn't that possible? So I think we kind of were rigid in our thinking, and we get bent out of shape about 1 or 2 or 3 issues and ignore the other stuff. Can I just say, I got to say, relationships, communication, always important. It was important when I started my career a really long time ago, and it's more important than ever now. The context for that has changed, and we're doing things like podcasting and there's social media now. But fundamentally, it's about the same. It's about connecting with people. It's about having that rapport, and I think that's a perennial leadership issue, which is really more important now than ever.
No, that's great. I'm going to quote Simon Sinek, although I'm probably going to butcher his quote, but he said something like, if your employees don't love working in your company, your customers never will, something like that. So, which is great, right? So you're kind, and I always say, like, treat your employees like your best customer, and then the rest kind of takes care of itself. Because if your employees are loving working in your firm, they're going to be happy, they're going to be speaking well to your customers, and it rounds it up nicely.
Lewis, it's your brand. Don't imagine your brand as a logo and a paint job on the outside of the company. That's not your brand. Your brand is everything you do, every action you take. And as I said earlier, if it's dysfunctional within the office, customers will smell it, communities will get to hear about it, and it'll be bad news for you and your business.
Definitely. It's a good segue into what you think the future of work is looking like. And I'm just gonna pull a comment you've just mentioned, and you talked about the office. So do you see the office as a key part of the future of work for different companies? How do you think it's going to go? Because we're at a little bit of a, while you ponder that, I'm just going to say we're in a little bit of a crossroads, because we obviously all started working from home. I'm seeing many large companies getting people back at least 3 days, some of the banks 5 days. You go work for Twitter, it's 7 days. And SMEs, I'm seeing way more variety. I mean, my firm is fully remote. There's many SMEs that like that. Well, what do you kind of see going forward?
Can I share my view using an analogy, perhaps?
Yeah.
At the start of the 20th century, we had cinema and radio, and then television came along, and everybody said television would replace cinema and radio. It didn't replace it. We have all three. And then streaming came along, and everybody said, well, streaming is definitely going to replace live radio, or it's certainly going to replace television and movies. And the answer is it doesn't. All of these things, which have been, some of them like radio and cinema, around a really long time, over 100 years, and they all do something different. And they all have a place in our society: cinema, radio, television, streaming, all of them, podcasts, particularly podcasts. Isn't it going to be the same with the world of work? Isn't it the case that we have just added, and the adding has been accelerated by the pandemic for sure, but we've added a different way to work, a different way to conduct business, to run our organizations. Some organizations can be fully remote, and some organizations will be 100% at a workplace because that's what they need. And I think there is no one size fits all. I think there will be as many different solutions as there are types of business, I think. Yeah. And I think that's great, actually. I think that makes our lives rich. I guess if you're looking for work, then the challenge is to ask yourself, what kind of situation suits me? A lot of people prefer to be in an office. A lot of people prefer to be working remote. What's the approach that suits you best? And then don't go into the wrong industry and then chafe when that industry is unable to give you what you want. Surely you have to choose the employer and the industry and understand, and in a way that we're just really starting to understand, that how I do my best work is going to depend on the kind of setup that this industry or this company. I used to think I'm a writer, a big part of what I do, and I thought, fantastic, home working, I'll love it. I can just get in my head and write, and it'll be fantastic. And then I discovered I actually need to speak to people. The best days I have are the days when I'm speaking with people. I'm 58 years old, and I discovered that probably when I was 57. Man, that's right. To be discovering it, isn't it? But
crazy.
I found that out about myself. So I think that's what we need to do. We need to think, how do we like, what when do we do our best work? How do we like working? And if you do it before you're 57, I'd really encourage that.
Probably useful too. I think, yeah, I think it is interesting. I think also it's worth mentioning that a lot of people have to go in, you know, like Uber drivers, medical professionals and stuff. So it's great that if you are able to think about this, count yourself really lucky. You know, it's a privilege to be able to work from different locations, home, office, and things like that. I think people sometimes miss that. And you're right. You know, also, I'm reading a really good book at the moment called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which I don't know if you've read. Incredible book.
Actually, it's that title, isn't it? It shows the power of a great title.
It's amazing. You know, and for me, it's like, you know, like exercise, nutrition, sleep, 3 cornerstones. And for me, you know, I try and treat myself like a professional athlete. We're working for a long time. You've got to look after yourself. So the interesting thing is, you know, we all have a different circadian rhythm, and some of us are more productive in the morning, evening, and all of this stuff. So it's good to work out and think about that when you're most productive.
So the book When by Daniel Pink is fantastic and makes the point, a similar point, I guess, that some people are owls, some people are larks. I'm really good first thing in the morning and later in the evening. It's that whole 8 hours in the middle of the day, which is not the best. You have to learn to find a way around that. But it is, you're right. It is what you've shone a light on there is actually little detail that you might think of as being routine. I'll give you 2 examples. Sleep would be one, but part of the advantage of me running my own business now and working from home is I sleep much better. So I'm actually, firstly, a nicer person. I'm much better at what I do than when I used to get up at 5:30 and schlep into London and work 12 hours in an office and come home. And by Wednesday or Thursday, I was done in, really, and wasn't brilliant. So I think sleep is one little kind of thing that we can pay attention to that makes a huge difference. Not just the time you go to bed, by the way, or the number of hours you have. I discovered that regularity, so going to bed at the same time and getting up at the same time, makes a huge difference. I never knew that. But also, so that's a kind of routine thing, sleep, that we all do. And communication would be the other one. Just the way we talk to people, the way we present ourselves, the way we connect. I think that's, you know, we're taught to speak and write when we're 4 or 5 years old. We're socialized. And then we think, and you see this with senior execs, you know, no senior exec is ever seen carrying around a book of communication skills. But actually, communication is such a fundamental part of what they do. It's kind of taken for granted that by the time you get to be a leader, you know how to communicate. And of course, so many don't, and particularly when, you know, there are new ways of communicating.
They don't teach that at school.
Say again?
They don't teach that at school.
No, they don't. They really don't. They don't teach you to ask questions. They don't ask you. They don't kind of help you with that. And I think that's one of those skills that really matters.
Yeah. These are nicely to kind of like what your thoughts on what skills people need to be successful in the future. And I think, to give some context, you know, we have like, I'm sure people, you know, ChatGPT-3. Have you heard of this new chatbot that's this AI that's, no. So there's this thing called ChatGPT. Okay. Microsoft invested a billion in them, and they've created an AI chatbot. So you can ask it anything. It can write your homework for you. It can write content, coding. I mean, literally anything. And anyway, my point to that is like, tech is advancing incredibly well. And for me, my view is that, you know, people ask me what skills should I work on to be successful, or my job is going to be made redundant because AI is taking it over. What should I do? And for me, it's the human skills to work on, the stuff you just talked about, the communicating and things. And for me, it's working hard on that. And linking this to kind of the way we work, I've also found a lot of individuals, and you mentioned it's about them. And I think it's important to also consider that you're working for a company, and the best people I know, the people that have been most successful in life, I think they make the top. I mean, a lot of them are very kind, despite I think maybe sometimes the persona of some of these folks, but a lot are really kind. And I speak to people about, you know, the best leaders that they've ever worked for. They often speak about the communication, the kindness and stuff. And the other thing that, again, is work hard, like be there for people, be reliable, be dependable. and just don't lose fact that like you got to work really, really hard in life, way harder than you think, if you want to get to where you've got to. And sport's a great example for that. Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, etc. You speak to the coaches of these folks and the people that have kind of been with them throughout their career, and one of the key themes is hard work.
That's why you've got to love what you do, isn't it? That's why, because so the flip side of that coin, because you're right, hard work and outputs. I think so much I encourage people to think about the results they're achieving and the outcomes they're achieving, rather than, as I used to do for many, many years, focus on the inputs, the number of hours I was in the office. The number of hours you're in the office, Jeremy, may matter to you, but actually everybody else is much more interested in what's being accomplished. So I think that's important. But the way to do that is to find work you enjoy. And if you're a professional footballer, heck, it's really, it shouldn't be too difficult to do that. You asked a great question though, and I'm just going to come back to that. What are some of the skills that people need to master? We talked a lot about them already. So be a decent member of the human race, authentic, but also make sure that person is open, curious, tolerant, all of those things. Firstly, empathy, of course, comes with that as well. This thing about understanding that the world is different or uncertain or paradoxical. Don't get hung up on it. Don't get bent out of shape by it. Don't try and hold your ground then in a world that's constantly changing. Be prepared to shift your views or evolve your thinking, because the world is shifting and evolving around you. I think that's really important. But Lewis, I got to come back to connection and rapport as well. And I think people think that rapport, let's call it that, is a nice to have. It's an option, and it's an optional extra. And I got to say, rapport really isn't an optional extra. The reason it matters to spend 5 minutes on a Monday morning asking somebody how their weekend was and what's going on and how they're doing is because it puts you both on the same page. And then if I need to challenge you or disagree with you or push back, you know that I'm well-intentioned. You know that I'm on your side. It's not cold and aggressive. It's warm and supportive, but I'm just asking you to do this difficult thing, or I'm raising this issue, and it's much easier when that connection and rapport is there. For that reason, I think it's not an optional extra. We need to just get better at connecting, and I think that's a big area, and it's easy, really easy now not to do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And then just to that, also like the trust bit is important. So again, I saw, I don't just watch Simon Sinek, but I'm gonna just mention another thing.
I love Simon.
He's great. I know he does a good. I think it was originally the US Army, and it was it's skill and trustworthiness and on a graph. And his thing was, the Army was like, would you let them look after your wife? Trustworthiness. And like, how good are they in the battlefield? And your ideal hire or your ideal teammate is clearly high trust and high skill. But you'd much rather have someone that is medium skill and high trust than high skill and low trust. Like, you want someone that's there for you, that's reliable, and it really feeds into the team. And if you have a whole team of caring, trustworthy people, the team performs way better than if there's one high skill, doesn't care, outlier. I think that kind of sums it up quite nicely.
I love it. I absolutely love that. So one of you kindly mentioned I'd written several business books. One of them was A Question of Trust. I have to say, it's really handy to have written A Question of Trust. Every time I lie to my children and they call me on it, I can say, I wrote the book on trust. We figured out now, and having just confessed that I am perhaps the least trustworthy person who wrote a book on trust. We did some research. Seriously, we did some research which looked at what people are looking for when they decide to trust someone. So we call them the drivers of trust, because trust is really, people think they understand it, and it's a word that's used a lot, but it's really great to pick it apart. And a lot of those drivers of trust are the kind of skills and qualities that will help help somebody in the workplace. They're things like fairness, openness, dependability, courage, competence. So whatever it is you do, you need to be really, really good at that. We can come back to that in a second. If you're looking at moving careers, that can be fine. But is that career you're moving into, or that new sector you're moving into, something that you can excel at? I mean, you don't have to have it as a career yet, but you need to imagine that you can be really good at it. For example, I've always wanted to be a football manager. I've never played professional football. My knowledge of football consists of listening to the radio and watching television. But I've thought, well, Jeremy, you've got all the other skills. I would never be able to be I would never be accepted in, and I would never be competent as a football manager. So I may have the other things, the openness, the empathy, courage, all of that thing. But if you're not competent, then it's not going to happen. So it's really interesting to kind of pick apart those drivers of trust, and I think unselfishness is one of them, is one of the drivers as well. So that was really interesting when we discovered that.
I love that. Very interesting. I need to read that book, so I will read that. You mentioned
compassion.
Right.
That was the other one. Sorry, compassion was another one, and that links in with what we were mentioning earlier about kindness. You have to at least have that empathy and that kind of decency and compassion. And I think that is a big change in the world of work. And here we are, third decade of the 21st century.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no, definitely. No, it's just, I agree. And all of those skills you mentioned, the human skills. You didn't mention a technical skill.
No. I mean, competence could be, if you're in a technical industry, then competence could be, if you're an engineer, then you need to be a good engineer. If you're a doctor, you need to be a good doctor, whatever it is, or nurse, or any of those things. But no, they aren't. I didn't talk about financial numeracy or profit.
But you can kind of learn some. I don't know, if you're hiring, I always say, like, if you find someone awesome, and I mean awesome by, they demonstrate these human skills. But if you find someone awesome like that, hire them, nurture them, develop them, train them, and you can pick up a lot of skills.
Isn't it true that talent loves talent? Talented people go to places with talent, and I've been privileged to work in places full of talent, and it's actually been quite humbling, and of course it's fed my imposter syndrome. But what I've noticed about, for example, The Economist, a world-class brand full of talented people, is they're not sitting around all day saying we're really good at what we do. What they're doing is sitting around saying, how can we be better? How, we have been given this 170-year-old brand that is respected around the world, and it's on our shoulders now. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. It's on us not to let that fade away, not to let that hard-won market position just fade away. So what are we going to do about it? It's a little bit like being an Olympic athlete, I always think. Really, really good at what you do, but really, really keen to do even more, go further, get better. And I think organizations that are like that do really well and tend to attract people as well.
No, I love that. So just to wind up, and I think we've, if you want to change career now, and the big theme I found this end of last year, beginning of this, from the conversations I have on the front line of recruiting, if there is a front line of recruiting, is a lot of people have been reassessing their life and what they do, and trying to connect work and life and make it a bit more interconnected. And a lot of folks, they want to transition to something, but they don't know how. Economics plays a part, of course. Any kind of advice or anything you've seen some of your coachees do to kind of make the steps towards transitioning?
A few thoughts. So firstly, don't be afraid, and I'd go further than that and say be bold in what you want to do. So for example, when I got the job with The Economist, I had always read the magazine. I'd always thought I could do that job. It was actually running their conference business. But I didn't have any experience running a conference business, and I didn't really have any experience working for a major brand. But I just thought, I'd really love to be there doing that job. So I chanced my arm and managed to get the job, and then thought, right. And I said to my family, everyone around me, I'm going to spend the first 3 months really getting up to speed, this point about competence, really getting good at at this role, and that's going to mean me getting my head down kind of disproportionately for the first 3 months. So don't be afraid of failure. Be bold would be one. I'd also encourage people to move for the right reasons, and that can be reward and remuneration, but it can be lots of other things. And the flip of that is, don't stay in a toxic environment or somewhere that doesn't suit your lifestyle. I mean, if you can, I appreciate not everybody has this choice. Somewhere that doesn't have your values, something like that. And remember, it's easier. I always say it's easier to move towards something positive than away from a negative. So what would be the ideal for you? What would be the thing that really kind of fills your heart and gets you excited and ignites that passion? We say that to people when they start their careers. I think it applies throughout a career. Don't be afraid to reignite that passion inside you and find something that works really well. Isn't there something about preparing or researching as well?
So for me, this ties our whole conversations together, because then it's like, okay, I want to transition, but how do I do it? And it's community. And so many people, me included, I get so many messages from folks. Hey, can you find me a job? Hey, find me a job. Hey, I'm looking for a job. Hey, I'm out of work. And it's kind of wouldn't it be better if you spend time with people, like ex-colleagues, but regularly, friends, not because you want anything in return, but just because you want to be there for your friends. You want to make friends with people. To make friends, you've got to spend time with them. And then when you need people's help, then it isn't. It's more natural, like you're asking your friends for help, and friends like to help friends. Friends like to work with friends. I like to give friends business. All this kind of stuff. So don't wait until you really need people. Like, focus on building your community just because, and then when you need it, they will be there for you. And I think for me that sums it up.
That's absolutely right. And I always tell people, at whatever stage they are in their career, look after your LinkedIn network. Look after your network, and LinkedIn is a great tool, a great way of doing that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like a broken record. It's a great way to stay connected.
It's wonderful. You can do it from home.
Absolutely right. Yes.
You can network like crazy on LinkedIn. It's great. So I love it. Jeremy, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you so much for joining me. How can people find you?
Online, on LinkedIn would be great. So Jeremy Kourdi, Kourdi spelled Kourdi. Find me on LinkedIn or at 𝐴𝐷𝐸.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please do not forget to subscribe in all the usual places: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you like to watch or listen to a podcast. Any comments or feedback, please drop us a DM. If you've got anything that you want us to discuss, again, feel free to get in touch.